Okay, hello and welcome guys to Cyber Diaries podcast. We have episode number 3 with Ovidiu from Cyscale. So great to have you on board with us, Ovidiu. Just a quick introduction, I guess, for those of you who are not familiar with yourself and what does Cyscale, I guess, do.
Hi everyone, nice having you here. Thanks for inviting me, Marius. I'm one of the co-founders of Cyscale. I'm a software engineer. Used to work as a security engineer for 10 years, doing data loss prevention. Moving then as chief information security officer, and more recently started Cyscale with some former colleagues. Cyscale built a cloud security product, so we layer on top of the major cloud security providers. The idea is to, offer a bit of extra security for those that need it.
Okay, brilliant. I guess, I wanted to pick apart, I think, nowadays, I guess is obviously information is getting a bit more out there. People, I'm a big fan of Ross Halil's book, who just recently written about, cyber for builders, where it portrays some of the information, how does, VCs operate, how does, PEs operate, but usually that information is not readily available to everyone. So I just wanted to, to get your perspective. You worked yourself, up to being in the CISO positions, chief architect. How did you find and how did you view, going from, leadership position into the boardroom position and creating, your own product? So how was that sort of journey for you?
Yeah, Ross materials are a must revisit. Both his blog and the book is super nice to have in the tool belt. I'm thinking about what happened on premise and what's happening in the cloud, and there seems to be a transition, or the way we do things are somehow perceived differently. But in reality, it's always about data. And if it's in the cloud, if it's on the hard drive, if it's in the on anywhere that you store it, in the end, as a security professional, I think you have no other purpose than to protect data. If you understand that and you try to build your profession around that, and try to understand that in the end, this is the bit which is important for us to protect, then you can easily move from one role to another because you keep the same idea in mind. So you knew when you are a security engineer that the application you're building eventually will process data, is it? So if you had that in mind, then it becomes a bit easier, or at least you think about what happens there. Because if you don't have that in mind, you're just writing software. You don't care. And if you didn't care back then, if you move doing something else in a C level, or if you're doing something related to security, you're most likely going to wind around the tail a lot of times as compared to thinking of what's important. For me, securing data on-prem, in the cloud, I think it's the essence of building security product. Of course, it comes along with other major components, network, identity, you name it. But in reality, those are pieces of data as well. So yeah, it's hard to get a message in the board level if you don't have something of value to bring in the board, and security and securing data is a good trigger most of the times, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because nowadays, I guess in this digital age, data more and more becomes a commodity. So it becomes a way of obviously how we can, commercialize our data, but how can we protect, obviously, because normally, for organizations, data becomes our, value proposition, our, a service that we do for our customers. So if we delve a bit deeper, so obviously, Cyscale, I wanted just to, a few words, I guess. First of all, how the idea was born, and if you can probably give us a bit of a story about, behind the Cyscale as a name, and then, if we can pick apart, we obviously talked a bit about, on-prem cloud. So I guess, why cloud security? How did you arrive with the idea of obviously building a product for cloud security?
Absolutely. So in a few years back, one of the challenges I had when working at previous companies was how reluctant those companies were in adopting the cloud. So I moved from a company in the past just because putting the super good technology they had on data loss prevention in the cloud was not on their radar. So understanding that they're not going to do anything about that was a trigger for me to move on. Moving on for me meant to keep up with the technologies which are in the market, and obviously be part of the cloud movement, cloud security movement. So that was important for me back then, and it still sits at the foundation of why I moved on from being a security engineer, working as an employee with Sophos, with Rolls-Royce, moving to building mode. Because when you go into building mode with your own path and with your way of seeing the technology evolving, you get the chance to have an impact. So for me, that impact was translated into bringing or making something that can secure the cloud. In my early days of starting Cyscale, we had this tagline, a secure cloud means a secure world. So I still think that, and more, if you look today at where most of the applications run or data resides, we can clearly say that if our cloud environments are secure, our world is a bit more secure, honestly, because almost everything is there nowadays. So that's why I moved and started Cyscale. Behind the name, we had this idea of cybersecurity should operate at scale. And that was kind of a mix between cybersecurity and scale. And that was how the name was born. We couldn't incorporate any cloud in it, but we made it like cloud security platform back then. But the idea behind still remains. If you manage to build a solution, not just a product or a tool, but a solution that can help organizations think about their security program at scale, you're already a step ahead, you know? So that's why we chose Cyscale as a name for the company. But it had to be in the cloud space for the reasons I just mentioned before.
Yeah, I think you're perfectly, correct. I think, in my own experience talking to various, companies, I think cloud adoption is it's here and it's here to stay. And I think it's, especially those organizations who are, younger, who don't have a legacy architecture, is very easy to, adopt and build, I guess, So, going for, I guess, a bit of a different angle, obviously, cloud security is not something new. There are various other platforms, without mentioning names, but how you guys, when you started building out and when you started building out sort of value proposition for potential customers, how did you form that value proposition, or how are you going to differentiate? Because obviously, it's hard to compete with the big boys, with the budgets they have. So, how did you guys model, and how did you thought, where yours going to be your market sort of going forward?
Yeah, of course, we started almost 5 years ago, and in 5 years, cloud security has changed dramatically. We started building cloud security posture management platform. That's commoditized today. You can't build, or you can build, but it will be very difficult to sell a CSPM solution today. If it doesn't have all of the other components that are required, it's hard for you to compete even with the cloud providers themselves to begin with, right? So when we started Cyscale, we even had a visual editor in place that would create secure infrastructure for you just by simply drag and dropping elements in the cloud. A couple of years later, we didn't manage to build that type of technology, but we built more of a first generation CSPM, I'd say, which we later understood that it's not going to work. And even a visual editor for cloud infrastructure was already available in the market. So we had to evolve from that. And obviously, Gartner helps you a lot of times in this regard, because They just throw out acronyms and you have to find your place in the acronym C. So we had to add more to Cyscale. And today, we might say we're a CNAP. So we're almost a complete cloud native application protection platform. It has data security, it has identity, it evolved into this space. And your question is very, very to the point with, okay, you have the big players, you have the newcomers, and they're very well funded. We all know they're in the billion range of investment, right? It's hard to compete there, but it's still possible because there's so much different segments and sectors in the market. And if you look, you kind of see that almost every other startup targets the enterprises. So the enterprise is the sweet spot, is the easiest, and probably the most, the faster to pay if you have the right solution for that. So you get this fraction somehow market where 90% of the startups go for whatever Fortune 500 companies are there, right? And then in the lower segment for the SMEs, for small to medium sized enterprises, there's little coverage. And we tried with Cyscale to go into that particular space and see exactly what's there and what solution this segment needs. And we're still building for this particular market. So in the way we proposed our value in the market was more targeted to a sector than by feature-wise. You know, we have 70–80% of the functionalities other bigger cloud security companies have, but most of the times our companies in our segment don't need all of those functionalities. You know, it's good enough for them. So.
I just wanted to pick up on one of the things you mentioned, Ovidiu, and I wanted to get your views. Obviously, you know, as you say, Gartner, obviously, and not only Gartner, but I think in some way vendors, you know, do a lot of, as you say, acronyms. So, you know, it goes from CNAP to ASPM to CSPM and all of that. But I guess, you know, and as you mentioned, I guess it's very hard to be a niche player in one particular field of say, cloud security if you're doing just, you know, for example, CSPM. Obviously, now you do CNAP and obviously then Kubernetes security, all of that, and it becomes a sort of platform in its own. So how do you view, you know, the announcement that Palo Alto said as well, that they're moving towards platforming? You know, do you think that most of the vendors nowadays are looking to grow either through acquisitions or through, you know, building their own into actually doing platforms, and we are probably going towards more aggregator tools where we're going to be limited in where we have just one niche players where, say, for example, they just do static code analysis. They're going to try and do everything as and sell as a platform.
Wow, really hard to tell. You look at the market, you look at the M&A activity, and it's like you see that it tends to become a platform play, but then you see that after each acquisition, there's another startup filling that space that was left by the company that got acquired. So I'm not sure how CrowdStrike and Zscaler, because probably, or Palo Alto Networks, they are the biggest acquirers in the space, and all they do is like becoming these huge platforms for security. It clearly works for them, right? You even have the newcomers. So there's one of our competitors that are recently announced they will buy data security posture management. So there are things happening in the industry at a speed which is hard to comprehend nowadays. But clearly, the signs from the market, in my view, is the signs tell us that people don't want tools anymore. So unless you connect the developer with the GRC manager and bring that as a business understanding, as a risk understanding to the C-level, it's hard for you to sell point solutions. Of course, it works where there are huge security companies, because security teams, like big security teams. But going back to the segment we are targeting, in our space, people don't have those resources. Companies don't have 10 plus security people managing all of that. So they want platforms and they want to tick a lot of boxes as soon as possible without having to spend time tweaking all of those different tools. So I think more and more, you're right, companies in both SMEs and large enterprises will want platform play to be their
I think
go-to.
I think it also helps when you think sometimes, from analyst or from your employees' perspective, it gets to a point where, having 10, 15 dashboards between separate tools, it becomes very cumbersome to get a clear picture. And also, I guess the problem sometimes you have as well, not every tool can communicate with other tool. So how you can segregate and get a one sort of idea can become tricky. So I think that's probably why, in some way, moving towards platforms can help.
I think, Marius, actually, if you look a bit at the market and you look at, so in the last week we had two major announcements of companies getting acquired. Both of those companies are building on top of Snowflake data lake. Yeah. So they're actually a layer of aggregated security on top of Snowflake. So obviously, there's this kind of, we don't want to have data spread all across 7, 10 tools. We want to have data in a single place, and ideally the solution that can extract the insights from it. So either if you use the data lake or use the data platform like Snowflake or other data platform which is out there, or a SIEM, you might be using a SIEM as well. But in reality, people don't want to put data together anymore on their own. It's not humanly possible, right? Yeah. So we speak about context. We talk about having connections, having relationships between all different parts of the security, vulnerabilities, the developer and source code, ASPM perspective. How is that affecting the deployed application in the cloud? How is that somehow relating back to the security policies and SLAs we have with customers? All of that, when you have to put together pieces, usually you don't do it right, or it gets missed on the way, and some of the things get lost in translation, if you want, at the API levels or at the technical level,
I think you're right, because I see a lot of organization, I see a lot of value, because I guess legacy type of tools, obviously there was logs nowadays create a plethora of data. So the movement towards data analysis as a security driver, I think it becomes a good value proposition. Now, if you go, circling back to Cyscale, I just wanted to pick up a couple of things. Obviously, if you just jump on your website, there is a slogan, obviously, and it says, "We guide you 20% of the most important fixes that will reduce 80% of your risk." So, it's a very powerful statement. And I guess we always are in security, we're always fighting to actually how we can reduce the funnel. We have plethora of vulnerabilities, we have plethora of misconfigurations. What are those things that, if we just solve a small percentage, they're going to make the biggest impact? So how do you guys arrive to that idea, and how do you guys, help that, how do you can quantify in your platform what's the most important?
Thanks for the question. One way of understanding why it's not working anymore, having humans analyzing the plethora of logs you just mentioned, is when you look at the major cloud providers and you go on an inventory list. So you get thousands or tens of thousands assets listed there, and then you have their respective SIEM solution that lists probably millions of signals. So it's hard to go through all of that. Whatever tool you look for has to put in front of you the top 10 things you can do that will have a significant impact, beneficial impact on your organization. So if your solution is not able to provide to the end user the low-hanging fruits that they can immediately fix with the highest impact on fixing the root cause of that problem, you failed in providing a security solution that actually works, right? Because you can't just give more work to the security engineers nowadays. They have enough. If they go on the cloud infrastructure and they look at any of the consoles of the major cloud providers, they're lost from the start. They don't know how to put data together. They don't know how to navigate. Oftentimes they don't have access here and there. So it's hard for them to do their work if they don't have those lower percentages of high impact remediations that they need to do. So if you manage to put those in front of them, and it might not get to 80%. And by the way, 80% is not enough. In my view, in security, having less than 100% is not ideal, but getting to 100% is not doable. We all know that. Like, that's not possible. So what you do in security, you mitigate and you accept risk, or you try to lower the impact of that. So that's why we came out with this slogan of pick these things up, and the product helps you do that. So if you end up using Cyscale and you're on the dashboard, you will have a card that tells you that the top misconfiguration, the top 5 assets with problems, and what you need to do to remediate those. If you do that, your security will improve significantly. Of course, you still have things to do, but you fix the major, the big holes within your cloud infrastructure. And that's a really, really good step going forward for your organization. You know, those are the obvious ones. Those are the things that someone trying to get into your cloud infrastructure will try first. So if you don't work on those, they might be trivial, you know, just a click of a button or just a command line, which is offered by the Cyscale platform for you just to paste. But they might have a big impact. That's why we selected that slogan. And I think it's important, and it's a trend. I'm seeing this more and more in the industry, and I'm happy. But all of that is possible if you have a platform play. Going back to discussing Palo Alto and the big guys, if you don't have all of the data together, you are going to recommend what's available from that perspective of the problem, right? So you might say that, fix this vulnerable code that is in the GitHub, but is that piece of code used anywhere? You know, okay, it has 3 high vulnerabilities. You need to understand the impact. So,
yeah, I think it's a very important point. I think sometimes, you know, as you say, you can hung up on the fact that, you know, you're trying to patch all of these holes, and you know, it's impossible to get to 100% security, as you say, and that's absolutely right, because you know, every one of us does not have an unlimited budget, you know, in security, and I think we always need to be making sure that we are secure enough. And I think the key point, as you say, getting those, you know, 80% of those risks qualified and fixing and doing that 20% of work, because all we sometimes need to do is just make it hard enough so the threat actors go and knock onto someone else's door instead of yours. And I think that's
nice way of saying it.
Usually that should be, you know, that should be the goal.
You
know, if we go into, you know, another, I guess, problem I often see in, you know, in security programs, and normally, you know, is that, you know, we can see from the trends that there is more and more vulnerabilities every year. Companies are spending more and more money trying to fix more and more issues instead, you know, of trying to actually be proactive, and how we can, you know, be more proactive and actually get ahead of the issues keep happening. So how you guys are, I guess, looking to solve that problem, and how you helping your customers to, I guess, get ahead, you know, instead of, you know, just fixing what's been found.
Of course. I think the key and the most important thing here is understanding if that particular problem is actually in use, if it's loaded. I'm not sure I'm using the right term here, but if it's loaded, if it's in use anywhere, then it becomes, or it is a problem. And that's the first thing you have to assess. Okay, I have this, I don't know, 20 vulnerabilities reported by Dependabot or by Snake. So what? Where is that vulnerability running now, right now? Do I have it running anywhere? Okay, there's a 0-day reported today. Do I have the tools? Not the people, because by the time you put all of the people together to give you those answers, might be a bit late.
Yeah.
Do I have the tools to tell me if I have that running across my digital footprint? If you manage to do that, if you manage to quickly and easily understand if that particular vulnerability or threat impacts your organization, you're a step ahead. It's easy to say that. Like, of course, it's easy to say that because we still don't live in an ultra-connected world or ultra-connected systems. It's not like in every organization, the GitHub account talks to the AWS account, talks with the developing team. There are still disconnects in all of these environments. So, but I think there are improvements happening. I think more and more this idea of bringing data together, either through a data lake or through a platform like Cyscale, where it's analyzed in context, will help companies understand this particular bit that I think is key. Is this particular problem identified by a system actually impacting my organization in any way? Maybe it may be just a Java vulnerability that runs in a closed virtual private network. I'm not affected by that, is it? It's a different story if that runs in a cloud function that serves the payment API, right? So all of that needs to come from the security program, defined well enough and with the right SLAs in place, because that's again a thing which is important if you especially have to offer those to your customers. And secondly, if you are able to have technology help you with that, understand that bit. We all know that last year, or actually I think it's already 2 years ago, we had Log4j, right? So do you remember how crazy it was? People were afraid of it, but it was getting them a week or a couple of weeks to understand if they have it anywhere, running anywhere. So that shouldn't happen. We can't let this happen again. You need to have the solutions. You need to have the tools that can tell you where that problem resides. So I think only that way you can get proactive.
Yeah, and I think it's important.
Please.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's important, yeah, because I think sometimes, usually it's a perfect example. Depending where the Log4j, if Log4j sits somewhere in development server that's in private environment that there's no potential or no possible access from outside environment, there's a very different risk profile. So I just wanted to pick on that. So I wanted to see. So do you guys? So I'm saying I bought Cyscale and I plug it in. Does it create its own through its own sort of assessment? Can assess asset criticality, or there is a mechanism that says, I need to obviously establish where's my crown jewels. So therefore, obviously, it will have a different risk profile depending on where the vulnerability or misconfiguration is.
The product is very customizable, and most of the security programs, the security software today becomes more and more customizable. With our platform, you can define, like for example, tags. You can say, okay, this is production environment. This production environment should get this type of treatment, this type of risk treatment. So you can even create projects like scoping down things for that particular problem. But also, it is easy to understand when you have all the data together. So that's the critical part. If you put data together and not in a tool here and in a tool there, and some analysis that's in that part, it becomes easier. You can do that automatically with Cyscale. With Cyscale, you don't have to configure this type of assessments. The moment you connect to your infrastructure, everything becomes nodes and relationships in the graph database we have. That's what powering Cyscale. It's a pure graph database. So in reality, and as a bit of magic in the product, whenever something happens in one part of the infrastructure, is immediately propagating in all the respective areas. So you don't have to reanalyze stuff. And that's quite powerful. So think about it. If now you have an open port that one of your colleagues just opened to the internet, and there is already a vulnerability that might be exploited on that particular port or for that particular service, that's immediately visible on the graph, So that's very powerful. Put in some AI capabilities, meaning some open AI or something that can help you generate the correct or the best remediation steps for that particular problem, and you're already ahead of the pack. So if you can extract from a solution, this is the problem for this particular risk with this particular asset, I think it's a lot of value. I'm actually thinking like moving away from the generic recommendations we used to get, like for vulnerabilities. They have generic recommendations, but those vulnerabilities with those generic recommendations are for everyone. They're not tailored to your specific use case and how you use that technology within the organization. And this is what you get when you have contextual security plus a bit of AI-assisted remediation guidance, which we have in the product today.
Okay, brilliant. And then I guess, we all know that, we kind of touched, additional security tools create, so many dashboards, and integration and collaboration between them, it becomes, a problem. So I guess, couple of prompt question, does Cyscale integrate in, for example, in your SIEM to get a one pane of glass view? And also how you guys integrate, do you guys integrate with workflow tools to make it easier to, for example, create tickets or create workloads or manage work between teams to make our life a bit, easier? Because I think nowadays, obviously, you very rarely manage stuff through, Excel and stuff like that. Everyone has some kind of a workflow tool, which it becomes easier to track, obviously evidence the work done. And obviously that goes into your audits and helping all of those, initiatives to do, that you need to do like nowadays.
Yeah. In Cyscale, we have a couple of functionalities, and I think it becomes a trend in the industry. So you can automatically push stuff in wherever your way your company organizes the work for security. Some teams are using just Slack, for example. Yeah. So they have a channel on Slack where they send everything they get for security, and people triage that and remediate it. Others use Jira or ServiceNow. We plan to have integration with Jira, for example, to push a ticket to the right team and to the right owner in the platform, so you can work on the issue. A neat functionality there is that whenever the issue gets resolved, we can close the ticket automatically, so you don't have to do anything there. So that's, again, something nice. Obviously, integration with SIEM, we don't consume data from SIEM. If that was the question, we don't consume data from SIEM, but we push data through the API in solutions. We can do webhooks, and on the request, we can also do other SIEM integration, but we don't actually consume data.
No,
a lot of functionality we push forward or push out of the platform goes into the more modern GRC tools, like the tools that we see today getting a lot of traction, like Dirata and Vanta, are using from Cyscale. Their findings and the remediation guidance from Cyscale can be part of the GRC platform as well. So yes.
No, I was going to say, I'm not thinking about consuming data from SIEM, but for example, I know myself, and I've always been a fan of SIEM is going to be your one source of truth. And normally, like whenever you work, you have SIEM open. So if there is a misconfiguration that Cyscale detects, I would expect it, instead of me going into Cyscale dashboard, I would expect there would be an issue raised through SIEM. So okay, okay, cool. I know something's gone wrong. Let me go into the dashboard and see whether I need to raise a ticket. Well, how do I triage? But normally SIEM will be the first point of my, whether it's checking, whether it's seeing where things happen. So I think nowadays normally tools will work towards integration where we can push data into SIEM to alert people of something happening, essentially.
Yeah, obviously you can't get away without integrating with a modern SIEM.
Yeah.
What we plan to do is integrate, of course, with the likes of I think there are 3 major SIEMs out there, or 4. Splunk, you get Logic, you get Sentinel from Microsoft, and probably that would be it. Also QRadar, but I don't know how much is it used.
Yeah.
So you have to analyze first. When you go into an integration, you have to first understand if it makes sense to put the effort in, right?
Yeah. I guess as part of movement to the cloud, sometimes organizations take a big leap. They not only move into the cloud, but they start to re-architecting the whole environment. And nowadays, I guess organizations, when they move into the cloud, they trying to get away from infrastructure as a service, and they try and move into platforms. And nowadays, I guess the biggest platform out there is usually microservices or Kubernetes deployments, and they don't come without their own risks, and I've seen a lot of them. I think there is still a big skills gap in understanding how to securely configure Kubernetes. So, I just wanted to touch a point. How are you guys helping in terms of understanding and discovering misconfigurations or risk within Kubernetes deployments? And how does that engine also can run and showcase what is the potential, biggest risks within Kubernetes deployments for organizations?
Well, that's a world on its own, Kubernetes. I'm not sure how much it simplifies as compared to complicating deploying modern cloud-native applications. It does help because it helps with orchestration. But we do have integration with Kubernetes, and our integration with Kubernetes covers vulnerability assessment, where those vulnerabilities are actually running within your Kubernetes clusters. We do for managed and unmanaged Kubernetes. So we're the major cloud providers like AKS, EKS, Google Container Engines, but also bare vanilla Kubernetes clusters can be connected to the Cyscale platform. That happens through an operator. So we deploy something like an agent in the cluster that reads the misconfigurations, that read the vulnerability identified on the Kubernetes cluster, and create, again, that context where there's a Kubernetes layer, there's an application layer on top, you see the data storage at the Kubernetes level, but also underneath in Cyscale, you can also see the underlying infrastructure supporting that Kubernetes cluster. So you can understand, for example, if there's an older unpatched, virtual machine that is powering your Kubernetes cluster, you can see that as a layer in the infrastructure, in the Cyscale application. Recommendations and remediations, again, are both static and customized by the integration we have with OpenAI. So we have that integration that generates precise remediation steps for that particular problem. I wouldn't say we cracked it, meaning that there's still a lot we can do for Kubernetes security. And it is a very competitive space. So we don't do yet data flow analysis in the Kubernetes cluster from a security perspective, but that is on the roadmap, and we hope to have that at some point in the product, because I think that's very helpful. If you understand how data flows within your cluster, which is something a lot of people don't yet, even though they use Kubernetes, then you can also think about what we said at the beginning of the call, meaning that you go and try to protect that data if you know where it is and how it flows or gets in or out of the application. So it all starts with that in our view, having a clear understanding of the inventory part in Kubernetes, monitoring that, and offering some remediation steps as much as possible, the remediation steps that are applicable to you, not the generic ones you have to think twice if you need those or not. So I think this is, again, a very important aspect in all of the security tools. And when people look for security tools, they should look at that. Do I get recommendations for my scenario, or do I get the generic recommendations that might apply to me? So that's important in my view.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly said. I think Kubernetes is such a vast minefield that people sometimes do not know. For example, if you just something deployed, pod-to-pod communication or pod-to-pod networking, lots of people don't understand. That out of the box, by default, every pod can communicate to every pod. So as soon as one is, breached, all of your, data that travels within all of the pods become a problem. So, understanding something like mutual, TLS deployment and things like that, it can help you a lot. How to secure your API server, etcd server, and all of that. So there's a lot to unpick in there. But I guess we covered quite a lot of topics about cloud, and I guess being a cloud security platform. So I guess to end it, I just wanted to get some of the thoughts and some of the views. How do you see cloud security tooling as well as landscape shaping over the year or two? Where do you see how it's changing and how that sort of field playing out over the next couple of years?
One, we have the perspective of our space more. I couldn't at this point, like for example, have the perspective of how Palo Alto Networks sees the space, right, or Microsoft security. But from our angle, there's a lot of consolidation happening at the upper level. You can clearly see that the platform play for the big security vendors is there, and they are aggressively taking action. When you see acquisitions of $300, $400, $500, $600 million, those are clear signs that they want that functionality very, very badly in their product. And I think that trend will continue, at least in this year, where probably also acquisitions are very affordable due to some economic trends that we see. In the cloud security space, in my view, and as long as you have the solution for your target audience, I think you can win and you will still win. So in our space, even if we have 70-80% of functionality from a bigger player, if that's enough and good enough for the security team who's going to use it, or most of the cases for the companies that don't have a security team, then it's again a big win. You're right about the migration and the trend of moving to the cloud. It's very, very, very aggressively happening. Nobody today starts a tech company, building a product and does it without putting everything on the cloud almost. So I don't think that. And then there's the AI boom. All of the AI companies, which is probably tens of thousands in last year and this year, are using the cloud to host their SaaS application and deliver that to their customers. Now, most of those companies will not buy Palo Alto Networks just because they don't need that, right? And they're just cloud infrastructure or cloud SaaS applications. They will come back to companies like Cyscale and whoever is in this space. So in my view, cloud security will require a platform, either if it's from the cloud provider or if it's from Cyscale or a larger player for bigger and larger enterprises, it will still be one as a platform. Point solutions are becoming less and less popular in what we can see. We'll look and see exactly how that unfolds throughout the year. So still to be seen. So that's my view. I think tooling are getting better, and a lot of them are getting better because we have the use of large language models, even for security, and we can make use of those. So those are big win for us. And if you make it work for that particular client or customer or segment, then it's good. I think it's okay.
Brilliant. Well, there you have it. Third episode is in the books. This has been Cyber Diaries. Yeah, there's been Cyber Diaries, and we had Ovidiu from Cyscale. So again, thank you very much for coming on board and sharing your your knowledge, your journey, sharing all of the knowledge about cloud security. So thank you very much for coming along, Ovidiu.
Thank you for inviting, and thank you everyone who joined us in the call. See you next time. Thank you, Mars.